Hey, what's up, y'all? I just wanted to update you guys on some potential delays for JJK leaks tonight because Japan is currently dealing with some insane weather. They have like a typhoon level storm rolling through there, and because of that, there may be delays. And obviously, if leaks are delayed, that is not that important. I'm just hoping everybody stays safe, but nothing is confirmed yet, so I'll keep you guys posted if anything else develops. Now, in the meantime, I've gotten some more questions from you guys, so let's run through these, starting with these from Sub Crazy. The first one being, was there anything that ever clarified that the JJK students told Gojo that Sukuna's domain was barrierless? And no, like, there was never anything explicitly on panel of them conveying that information to him. But surely they told him, right? Like, there's no way that information was left out, in my opinion. But people argue, well, then why didn't Gojo do something different with his domain at first? Because he loses that first domain clash because Sukuna attacks his from the outside, right? And I think there's other ways to kind of make that make sense. First, Gojo didn't just know that he was going to have an equal refinement with Sukuna, right? In Gojo's mind, he might have even thought, regardless if Sukuna's barrier is open, mine might be more refined and just destroy his outright, right? That's at least possible. So it was probably only when forced upon like needing to adapt and evolve his domain to deal with the barrier that he actually started doing it. I mean, it's also Gojo we're talking about here, right? He's always viewed himself as the strongest. He went into this battle thinking he would win. It was probably just not a matter of him trying to figure out a way to defeat that open domain before he was actually in the moment. Speaks to his hubris a bit, right? And then the second question is, in your opinion, how likely do you think it would be for Kenny to pull up just as Sukuna is left holding the ultimate L? And with 4 chapters left, less likely than if there were more, right? If you've seen some of my videos, I've long talked about this possibility of Kenjaku coming back. I did think that was out there, but with 4 chapters left, I don't know. I don't know if there would be enough time to like resolve him coming back in like a whole other set of events before this manga ends. So less likely, but still possible, I'd say. Next up, we got this one from Morale, who says, there's a new series I should check out called Ghost Fixers from the creator of Summertime Rendering, and I've actually never heard of either of those, but by your description here saying it's a mix between JJK and Chainsaw Man, I feel like it could be up my alley. So, you know, no promises on if I'll cover it or anything, but I'll at least check it out. Next up, we've got a longer one here from Tobias, and Tobias, thank you so much for the generous donation, man. But y'all pause to read this and check it out, and it's actually not all of it, but you can get the gist of it from here. Tobias is essentially talking about Higuruma and how he's one of his favorite characters, but how he's underrated and was poorly done. And so I'll totally agree that Higuruma is underrated. He's one of my favorites as well, but I wouldn't say he's poorly done. I understand where your criticisms are coming from. You really just wanted more from him, especially with how cool and powerful his technique was, and I can't argue with you there, but I actually really like the development Gege gave Higuruma in the little amount like he's actually been in the manga. Like I said, he's one of my favorites as well. But to respond to one thing you say here about how Sukuna was tried for the crime of the massacre in Shibuya out of all of the crimes that were there, right, for potential, like could we have seen a Heian era flashback or something, that was specifically by design. Because all of the crimes, you know, Sukuna had in his, you know, 1,000 years of existence, they didn't want to risk Judge Man picking a crime that wasn't serious. They wanted to make sure that they would get a crime that could get the death penalty. So they didn't even leave it to chance. That's why it was actually a retrial of Yuji that just shifted to Sukuna. So that's what happened there, and I actually really like the cleverness behind that. But yeah, had they not come up with that plan, that would have been a really cool opportunity to show some sort of Heian era flashback or something. Next up, Yukio says, I know Nanami is gone, but what do you think would happen if Nanami would have used a proper bladed weapon for his technique instead of the blunt one? And this is a great question, right? We don't really know like the exact calculations and nuance of how that technique functions. Obviously, we know it's a 7:3 ratio and it effectively serves as a critical hit, but like how is that calculation done, right? Because maybe it doesn't matter if it's a sharp blade versus a blunt weapon, or maybe it does and he uses a blunt weapon because he can generate more force with that as opposed to like the sharper bladed weapon, because if he can sever something with the blunt force that calculates or generates more, then he doesn't need to sacrifice force for like I can't think of the right word here, but severing power, if that makes sense. So I don't really know like what the math is there, or if any of that is even like something that went through Gege's head with this. Maybe it was just a pure like aura moment, like it's much cooler for him to use a blunt weapon because he didn't need to use a sharp one. But yeah, it's a good thought, and I don't really have a perfect answer, but I think it ultimately probably just didn't matter and he just used what he preferred. Next up, we got this one from Crimson, who is not only a YouTube member, but is also one of my moderators and our resident watch party host. So shout out to Crimson. Thank you so much, man. But he wants to know, do I think a hypothetical Zenin clan member that had mastered 10 Shadows, meaning has the domain expansion, has Mahoraga tamed, and all that jazz, could they have theoretically defeated everyone within the Shibuya station? Kenjaku, Jogo, Choso, Dagon, Hanami, and Mahito simultaneously. So that's where we get really tied up there, because all at once is just crazy, right? You're just outnumbered. We got an action economy issue from my D&D folks out there, but I would say that if we're saying they're on Gojo's level, then probably, because Gojo and Sukuna are just so built different compared to everybody else in the verse that, like, for the thought experiment of this, let's just give Sukuna 10 shadows and only 10 shadows, or give Gojo 10 shadows and only 10 shadows, then I think either of them could do that. But if we're saying that they're not quite Gojo slash Sukuna level, but they have just mastered the 10 shadows, I think they would probably lose. Even if their domain is more refined than everyone's there and they trap all 6 of those people in the domain, it's still just going to be tough to be able to defend against all of them. We also don't know exactly what the 10 shadows domain does. Yeah, we have a pretty good idea, but like, does that mean he could summon infinite Maharagas in the domain? Because if so, then he probably does make short work of them. But if not, I think there's just enough people there, especially like some really strong people and some really smart people, right, that they would be able to find out a way to take them down just on pure numbers alone. So I guess I have a two-pronged answer here. If we're literally talking Gojo Sukuna level, then yes, they can do it. If not, and we're just talking like a really strong person, you know, in the normal scale, but with all of the toolkits of 10 Shadows, I think they would get overwhelmed. Next up, we've got an ending theory from Redbeard, so y'all pause to read it here, but it's essentially the idea that Yuji will die of old age. He won't pull some sort of self-sacrifice play. He won't be executed to get rid of Sukuna. He will get to live on, you know, quote-unquote, happily ever after, and then just take out Sukuna whenever he dies naturally. And I would be here for this ending if this is how it plays out. I think this would be the happiest possible ending for JJK, especially if it means both Nobara and Megami live as well, with Gojo being the only one to die. So I definitely think this is possible. It's just that I do think other possibilities are equally as likely at this point. But as we go through these last 4 chapters, we'll see kind of how that probability shifts. Next up, we've got another long one from Cornell, the movie dude here, so y'all pause to read it, but it deals with binding vows, and essentially Cornell is saying that they're very much mental, this idea that it could even be a placebo type of thing, that as long as you have enough self-belief in what you are applying, then it will work. And conversely, he says that maybe if you broke a binding vow and like didn't believe in it, then maybe you wouldn't even suffer the sacrifice, or the consequences rather, from it. And I think this makes sense. I've put out a video before on like who approves binding vows. Like, is it God? Is it just some like indifferent karmic universal force out in the world, or is it like self-belief type of thing? And so, you know, I doubt we'll get a canonical answer on this before the end of the series. I do think this kind of placebo way of thinking could be true, but I would push back on the idea that there would be no consequences as long as you didn't believe in it, just because like the literal masters of jujutsu in this world, Kenjaku and Sukuna, both fear it. So I feel like if there was a way to kind of just like realize you could game the system like that, then they would have figured that out. But it's certainly an interesting possibility. Next up, Yasser says, do you think Gojo reached his peak, or could he have gotten even stronger? And I absolutely think he could have gotten stronger. He was only 29, right? He still had a lot of growing that he could have done, a lot of training, a lot of learning, especially with the younger generation rising up who were going to be extremely powerful as well. You know, as iron sharpens iron, they could have only probably increased to get stronger and stronger. I mean, aside from the Sukuna fight and the Toji fight when he was like 15 years old, he'd never really been truly challenged, right? So while Gojo was just, you know, on a whole other level, I definitely don't think he'd reached his peak. Next up, RDB says, maybe Sumiki is somehow brought back as a cursed corpse for Megami's sake. Is that possible? And I'll say that anything's possible, right? Especially in a work of fiction and especially a manga like this. But we do know that for cursed corpses, you need 3 souls in order for it to like maintain balance and stability. So it wouldn't just be Sumiki if they used her in a cursed corpse. There would be 2 other people as well. And obviously there's lots of corpses to choose from in JJK. So it's not that they couldn't do it, but I just don't know if that's how we would like see Sumiki again. Next up, Himothy Wayne says, you're an incredibly optimistic person, which we need more of in this world, but I want to know what your top 5 biggest fumbles from this series have been. And this is going to be tough, and I don't want to just like sound like a cop-out answer here, but it's going to be hard for me to list 5 things like that, especially with the series not done yet. I think it'll be easier to look back at things once it's fully complete and be like, okay, yeah, this, that, and the other were things that I really wish had been fleshed out more or had gone another way and stuff like that. And for, you know, nothing's perfect. Obviously, JJK is not perfect either. But, like, unless I have, like, a truly, like, valid negative thing to say, that's just not the type of content I want to put out. You know, not every story is going to be for every person, and that's fine, right? So that's largely why I try to stay away from just negativity in content. But again, not to fully cop out here, a couple things I would say is that I just wish there was more world building, because I think Gege made a really interesting world with a really in-depth power system, right? So it would have been cool to explore more of that, whether it is via Heian era flashbacks or just learning more about how Jujutsu Society sprung up and the role the big 3 clans play. So just more world building would have been great. And on top of that, I would say just more downtime, like less fighting and more character interactions and just room for those types of things to breathe. I remember when we first got, you know, the time skip to the Gojo Sukuna fight, a lot of people were like, what the heck? Like, we're already just jumping straight there. It would have been cool to, you know, find out more about what happened during that lull. But now kind of that we're on the other side of it, it makes sense what Gege was doing there, because we're kind of getting stuff revealed in flashbacks, and that's kind of the narrative device he's been using to like build up the hype and anticipation in this fight. So, you know, for every potential like, well, why did this happen this way? I think in most cases there's like a logical and reasonable explanation for why Gege did what he did. And also with JJK just being 271 chapters total, there's just not enough space for everything, right? I mean, if you compare that to other shonen battle manga, JJK is going to be really short, right? So I just think some of those things have to get left on the shelf in terms of like having wanted more world building or more character interactions. Now, you know, could have been a little better here and there, of course, but I'm starting to get yappy here. Point is, I don't have like a list of 5 specific fumbles in that regard. Maybe once the series is actually over, I can have more of that type of discussion. But right now, for the most part, I've been pretty happy with JJK. Next up, 8440 wanted me to go over the confirmed body soul swaps. And so there are only 3 that we have hard confirmed. Yuta and Yuji, Yuji and Kusakabe, and Yuta and Gojo. Anything else is just speculation. Like Inumaki and Miwa, Choso and Shoko, I'd be interested to know where you were pulling that from, but I think those 3 I mentioned are the only 3 that have been hard confirmed. Next up, Wahad asks, who is the true honored one, Gojo, Sukuna, or Yuji? And I think we can just scratch off Yuji, not to take away anything from his big MC moment here, but it's really between Gojo and Sukuna, and I think we need to define what honored one is, because they were both referred to as that in the series, right? In Gojo's case, it was the direct parallel to Buddha, and I think if that's like the definition we're going to use, then it is Gojo amongst all else, because he is that parallel. Now, it was referenced in Sukuna with the line, because only his pleasure and displeasure exist, meaning like might makes right, and because no one can do anything to Sukuna, he is the honored one. So depending on which definition you want to use, I think would, you know, be your choice between the 2 strongest here. But I would say probably Gojo, just based on the fact that that phrase does come from Buddhism directly, and he again is the parallel to Buddha. And then finally, Bep says, I believe season 3 of JJK will end with the Sukuna revival arc, leaving a whole cliffhanger for anime watchers. And I'm with you, man. I put out a video a while back on what I thought season 3 might cover, and I think if they end end on the cliffhanger of Sukuna switching to Megami, that would just be incredible. So we'll have to see. And then to your question of would they turn the Shinjuku Showdown into a movie, I could definitely see that happening, but especially after the recent announcement where they're turning Hidden Inventory into a movie, I could see them doing the same thing, like releasing it as an anime season first and then just double dipping and cashing in by also releasing it as a movie. That's all for this one, y'all. Thank you guys so much, and I will keep you posted on the leaks.